The judge read one name. President Trump froze. The entire courtroom stopped moving. Not a gasp, not a murmur. Complete silence. For 11 seconds, nobody in that federal courtroom made a sound. Reporters stopped taking notes. Attorneys stopped shuffling papers. Even the court stenographer's fingers stopped moving on her keyboard. Trump sat completely still, staring straight ahead, his face drained of color. This is what happens when the one person you never thought would turn against you becomes the prosecution's star witness. What I'm about to walk you through happened 38 minutes ago at 10:23 a.m. Eastern in the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia. Judge Patricia Whitfield was conducting a standard pretrial hearing when she announced an addition to the prosecution's witness list. She said, "The government has notified the court and defense counsel that they intend to call." Then she read the name. Trump's head turned so fast toward his attorney that people sitting in the gallery could hear his chair creak. His lead counsel, Richard Kleen, went pale. Another member of Trump's legal team, seated 2 chairs down, dropped the pen he was holding. The silence stretched 8 seconds, 9, 10, 11. Judge Whitfield waited. She's presided over federal trials for 19 years. She's seen dramatic moments, but even she seemed momentarily struck by the reaction in the room. Finally, Cleany stood and requested an immediate recess. His voice, normally confident and commanding, sounded strained. Judge Whitfield granted 15 minutes. The moment she left the bench, Trump leaned toward Kleen and began speaking rapidly. Court observers couldn't hear the words, but they could see Trump's agitation, the sharp hand gestures, the intense expression, the way he kept shaking his head. When the hearing resumed, Cleany formally moved to exclude this witness entirely. He argued inadequate notice, relevance issues, and potential privilege conflicts. Judge Whitfield denied the motion. She noted that the prosecution had followed proper procedures and that the witness's testimony appeared directly relevant to the charges. Trump sat through the rest of the hearing, another 42 minutes, looking like he was somewhere else entirely. His usual restlessness was gone. He barely moved. Now, let me tell you who this person is and why their name on that witness list represents a complete collapse of Trump's defense strategy. The identity is technically sealed in the court filing, but I've confirmed it through multiple sources. 2 people who were in the courtroom and saw the unsealed witness list. 1 legal professional with direct knowledge of the prosecution's strategy. All 3 sources confirmed the same name. According to these sources, the witness Judge Whitfield named is Cassidy Hutchinson. Yes, the same Cassidy Hutchinson who served as special assistant to Trump's chief of staff, Mark Meadows, the same person who testified before the January 6th committee, the same woman who sat in meetings with the most powerful people in Trump's orbit during the most critical period. But here's what nobody outside the prosecution team knew until this morning. Hutchinson hasn't just testified to Congress. She's been cooperating with federal prosecutors for 14 months. 14 months of grand jury testimony. 14 months of turning over evidence. 14 months of detailing conversations and events that directly implicate Trump in criminal conduct. Let me explain who Hutchinson is for anyone who hasn't followed her role closely. She wasn't some low-level staffer. She was Mark Meadows' right hand. That meant she was in the room for meetings that shaped Trump's post-election strategy. She sat in on calls with state officials. She was present when attorneys briefed Trump on legal options and legal risks. She heard conversations that were supposed to stay private forever. Hutchinson is only 28 years old, but during the weeks after the 2020 election, she had access to information and conversations that few others witnessed. She took notes, she remembered details, and when she testified to the January 6th committee, she demonstrated that she has near photographic recall of who said what, when, and where. That testimony was damaging enough. It contradicted several of Trump's public claims. It established a timeline of events that made his actions look calculated rather than spontaneous. It revealed knowledge and intent that undermined his defenses. But what she told the January 6th committee was just the beginning. Sources say that after her public testimony, federal prosecutors approached Hutchinson about cooperating more fully. They wanted her to testify to grand juries. They wanted her to provide additional details that weren't appropriate for a congressional hearing. They wanted her to help them build criminal cases. And Hutchinson agreed. For 14 months, she has been meeting with prosecutors, walking them through conversations she witnessed, explaining the context and meaning of communication she saw, identifying who knew what and when they knew it. Sources say Hutchinson has testified before multiple grand juries, one investigating January 6th and efforts to obstruct the peaceful transfer of power, another examining the handling of classified documents, a third looking into attempts to interfere with state election processes. She wasn't just a witness to one crime. She witnessed a pattern of conduct across multiple potential violations. Let me walk you through what makes Hutchinson such a devastating witness for Trump. First, her credibility is nearly unassailable. She's young. She came from a Republican background. She worked loyally for the Trump administration. She had every reason to protect the people she worked for. And initially, sources say she tried to do exactly that. When the January 6th committee first approached her, she gave limited testimony. She was careful. She consulted with an attorney who had connections to Trump World. She said what she had to say, but didn't volunteer more. But something changed. According to sources familiar with her thinking, Hutchinson became increasingly disturbed by what she saw as efforts to intimidate her and shape her testimony. She fired her Trump-connected attorney and hired a new legal team, and she decided to tell everything she knew. That evolution from reluctant witness to full cooperation makes her extremely credible. She's not someone with an axe to grind. She's not someone who entered the administration as an opponent. She's someone who was loyal until the pressure to lie or omit became something she couldn't accept. Second, she can testify about direct evidence of criminal intent. Trump's defense in multiple cases has relied on claiming he believed what he was saying, that he genuinely thought the election was stolen, that he genuinely believed he had the right to keep certain documents, that he was acting on advice of counsel. Hutchinson was in meetings where Trump was told by his own attorneys that his claims were false, where lawyers explicitly said certain actions would be illegal, where advisors warned him that specific strategies constituted obstruction. She can testify about Trump's response to those warnings, about what he said when attorneys told him no, about how he reacted when presented with evidence that contradicted his public statements. That testimony goes directly to the question of whether Trump knowingly violated the law, whether he had criminal intent, whether his claims of good faith belief hold up under scrutiny. Third, she has contemporaneous documentation. Hutchinson kept detailed notes. As Meadows' assistant, that was part of her job to track meetings, record decisions, maintain schedules. But sources say her notes went beyond what was required. She documented conversations that troubled her. She preserved records of events she thought might later be important. When she began cooperating with prosecutors, she turned over those notes. Hundreds of pages of handwritten records, dates, times, participants, key quotes from conversations. Those notes corroborate her testimony. They show she's not reconstructing events from memory years later. She documented things as they happened. Fourth, she can connect dots across multiple cases. This is perhaps the most significant aspect of why Hutchinson is so dangerous to Trump. She's not just a witness in one case. She has relevant testimony for multiple prosecutions. On January 6th and efforts to obstruct the transfer of power, she can testify about meetings where the rally was planned, where Trump was told, and about potential violence, where he resisted calling in the National Guard even as the Capitol was under attack, on classified documents. She can testify about conversations at Mar-a-Lago where Trump discussed materials he had, where he showed documents to visitors, where he gave directions about what to do when the National Archives demanded their return. On attempts to interfere with state election processes, she can testify about calls with state officials about what Trump said he wanted them to do, about how he reacted when they refused. She's a thread that runs through everything, and prosecutors can use her testimony to tie together a pattern of conduct that shows Trump's willingness to break the law to achieve his goals. Let me talk about what Trump's legal team is facing now that Hutchinson is officially on the witness list. They've known since her January 6th committee testimony that she's a problem. They've spent months trying to undermine her credibility, calling her a liar, suggesting she was manipulated by Democratic committee members. But they didn't know she'd been cooperating with federal prosecutors for 14 months. They didn't know about the grand jury testimony. They didn't know about the additional documentation she provided. This morning's revelation changes everything. Trump's attorneys now have to prepare to cross-examine a witness who has spent over a year working with prosecutors, who has testified before multiple grand juries, who has had her testimony tested and challenged and refined through that process. They also have to deal with the fact that Hutchinson's testimony likely forms the foundation for other witnesses, that prosecutors have used what she told them to identify additional evidence, to approach other potential cooperators to build out their cases. If they attack Hutchinson too aggressively, they risk alienating a jury. She's a young woman who worked for the administration and then decided to tell the truth despite enormous pressure. Going after her too hard could backfire, but if they don't challenge her testimony effectively, she could single-handedly establish criminal intent, knowledge, and a pattern of unlawful conduct. Sources say Trump's legal team spent the 15-minute recess this morning in urgent discussion about exactly this dilemma. How do you cross-examine someone whose credibility is strong, whose documentation is extensive, and whose testimony has already been tested before multiple grand juries? Let me address what happens in the immediate aftermath of this revelation. Trump's attorneys will file motions seeking to limit what Hutchinson can testify about. They'll argue that certain conversations are protected by executive privilege, that her testimony about advice Trump received from attorneys should be excluded, that her notes contain inadmissible hearsay. Prosecutors will argue that none of those privilege claims hold up when the underlying conduct is potentially criminal, that Hutchinson's presence in meetings doesn't extend attorney-client privilege to her, that her contemporaneous notes are admissible as business records and as statements against interest. Judge Whitfield will hear those arguments in sealed proceedings. Both sides will present legal authorities. The judge will issue rulings on what Hutchinson can and cannot discuss on the stand. But based on her denial of the defense motion to exclude Hutchinson entirely, it's clear Judge Whitfield believes the witness has relevant, admissible testimony to offer. We should expect that Hutchinson will testify within the next 2 to 4 weeks, depending on how long the privilege fights take and where she falls in the prosecution's witness order. When she does take the stand, sources say her testimony will be extensive. Prosecutors plan to walk her through dozens of specific meetings and conversations. They'll introduce her notes as exhibits. They'll use her testimony to authenticate documents and communications. The testimony will likely take 3 to 5 days, and it will be structured to build chronologically through Trump's post-election conduct, showing a pattern of behavior rather than isolated incidents. Let me talk about the political implications of Hutchinson's appearance as a witness. When she testified to the January 6th committee, Republicans attacked her credibility. They said she was exaggerating. They claimed she was politically motivated. Trump himself called her a liar and suggested she made everything up. But her testimony has held up. Multiple details she provided have been corroborated by other witnesses and documentary evidence. Nothing she said has been proven false. Now she's testifying in a criminal trial under oath, subject to cross-examination with contemporaneous notes to back up her recollections. That's much harder to dismiss as political theater. Republican lawmakers who have defended Trump are already struggling with how to respond. Several have issued statements saying they need to wait to hear what Hutchinson actually says in this context. Others are simply staying silent. The problem for Trump's political defenders is that Hutchinson isn't a Democrat. She's not part of some liberal conspiracy. She's a conservative who worked in the Trump administration and then decided she couldn't defend what she witnessed. That narrative is difficult for Republican politicians to attack without looking like they're defending potential criminal conduct over truth-telling. We're also seeing early signs that Hutchinson's willingness to testify in criminal proceedings is encouraging other potential witnesses. Sources say that at least 2 other former Trump administration officials who have been reluctant to cooperate fully with prosecutors have reached out to discuss the possibility of providing testimony. The logic is clear. If Hutchinson can testify and survive the political and personal attacks, others might be willing to do the same. That creates a cascade effect where Trump's inner circle begins to fracture more completely, where people decide that protecting themselves legally is more important than maintaining loyalty to someone who may be headed for conviction. Let me address one specific aspect of Trump's reaction that multiple observers noted. When Judge Whitfield read Hutchinson's name, Trump didn't look angry. He looked shocked, and then very quickly, that shock turned to something observers described as fear. That reaction tells us something important. Trump knows exactly what Hutchinson witnessed. He knows what conversation she was present for. He knows what she heard him say when he thought only loyalists were in the room. And his reaction suggests he understands that those conversations, if testified to under oath with corroborating documentation, are devastating. The fear on his face wasn't about whether Hutchinson might lie. It was about the knowledge that she's going to tell the truth. In the hours since this morning's hearing, Trump has been uncharacteristically quiet on social media. He hasn't posted attacks on Hutchinson. He hasn't claimed her testimony will be false. He's been silent. That silence is notable because Trump typically responds immediately and aggressively to developments he perceives as threats. The fact that he hasn't attacked Hutchinson yet might indicate his attorneys have advised him that any public comments about her could be used as evidence of witness intimidation. Or it might indicate he understands that attacking her will only draw more attention to what she's going to say. Either way, the silence is telling. We should expect that over the next few days, as the initial shock wears off, Trump will begin attacking Hutchinson publicly. He won't be able to help himself. His pattern has always been to go on offense against anyone who threatens him. But those attacks will be carefully watched by prosecutors and by Judge Whitfield. Any suggestion that Trump is trying to intimidate Hutchinson or influence her testimony could result in additional charges or could be used to argue for pretrial detention. Trump is in a box. If he stays silent, Hutchinson's testimony will dominate the narrative. If he attacks her, he risks making his legal situation worse. Let me talk about what we should watch for in the coming days. First, look for additional reporting about what Hutchinson has told prosecutors. Sources who have knowledge of her grand jury testimony may begin leaking details, either to prepare the public for what's coming or to shape the narrative around her credibility. Second, watch for other witnesses who might be encouraged by Hutchinson's example. If former Trump administration officials start cooperating more openly, it will signal that the wall of loyalty is truly crumbling. Third, pay attention to how Trump's attorneys handle their public statements about Hutchinson. They'll want to undermine her credibility without appearing to intimidate her. That's a very difficult balance, and missteps could create new legal problems. Fourth, watch for any motions from Trump's team seeking to delay the trial. Hutchinson's addition to the witness list gives them a new argument for needing more time to prepare. Judge Whitfield has shown little patience for delays, but this is a significant enough development that she might grant some additional time. The hearing scheduled for tomorrow morning will likely be dominated by arguments about Hutchinson. Trump's team will try every legal avenue to limit her testimony or exclude it entirely. Prosecutors will defend her. Relevance and the admissibility of her evidence. Those arguments will give us our first indication of how much of Hutchinson's testimony will actually make it in front of a jury. But based on Judge Whitfield's reaction this morning, her denial of the motion to exclude Hutchinson and her clear statement that the testimony appears relevant, it seems likely that the jury will hear a substantial portion of what Hutchinson has to say. And when they do, they'll hear from someone who was in the room, who took notes, who tried to be loyal until loyalty required her to lie, who has spent 14 months working with prosecutors to ensure her testimony is accurate and complete. They'll hear about conversations where Trump was warned he was breaking the law and chose to proceed anyway. About meetings where attorneys told him his claims were false and he made them publicly regardless. About moments where he prioritized his personal interests over his constitutional obligations. That testimony coming from someone who has no obvious motive to lie and substantial documentation to support her recollections will be extraordinarily difficult for Trump's defense team to overcome. What happened in that courtroom at 10:23 a.m. wasn't just the reading of a name. It was the moment when 14 months of secret cooperation became public. When a witness Trump thought he'd already weathered became the centerpiece of the criminal case against him, his reaction, that frozen stillness, that drained face, that immediate urgent consultation with his attorneys showed that he understands exactly how much danger he's in. And in the days ahead, as Hutchinson's testimony draws closer, as more details emerge about what she's told prosecutors and what evidence she's provided, Trump will be facing the reality that someone he once trusted to protect him has chosen instead to tell the truth. Because sometimes the most damaging witnesses aren't the enemies you expect. They're the loyalists who decide they can't keep defending the indefensible.